In November 2022, I traveled over 17,000 miles. Find out what happened.
I'm in Narita Airport in Tokyo. I got here at about 6 o'clock this morning, Tokyo time, and I have been waiting till 9 o'clock for the coffee shop to open, which is right here. I I just got off of I guess it was a 4-hour flight from Manila to Narita, and I spent 12 hours in the Manila airport on a layover because I took a flight from Iloilo to Manila, and then I had to wait for my Japan Airways flight to leave Manila to come to Tokyo, and that took 12 hours. So I waited in the airport that whole time. I barely slept on the airplane, and I'm really tired. I need some coffee, and what I really need is a nap, but I don't know if there's any place around here I can actually take a nap. So I'm gonna try to find someplace after I get some good coffee in me, maybe something to eat for breakfast. I'm gonna head over to these chairs they have over here and try to find a place to take just a little short nap before I'm on a 10-hour layover here in Narita. My flight does not leave until 5 p.m.
On November 6th, 2022, I went on a month-long trip that would take me around the world and over 17,000 miles in that month. To say the trip was difficult is an understatement. The biggest mistake I made was booking the trip through an online travel agent, one of the discount online travel agencies. I won't name any names, but it starts with cheap, so figure that one out. For some reason, the flights were nice and cheap, but they put layovers in every major city over 10 hours. One layover was 17 hours. It did that on my trip there and on my return trip. So here's how it shook out. I left Iloilo City on the night of Sunday, November 6th, and boarded an airplane. An hour later, I was in Manila. I was to spend the next 12 hours in a hot terminal outside of the air conditioning in the Manila airport. Since my flight was so far away, they hadn't opened ticketing for that flight, so I had to wait out in the heat. Thankfully, I took a little walk and found a Jollibee. I sat in Jollibee for a few hours. The contrast between the outside and the inside of Jollibee. Inside of Jollibee, you could hang meat in there. Literally, you could almost see your breath in there. They had the air conditioner on so cold. I had a jacket on. I had to put a hat on. Everything. This was in Manila. Okay. I waited all those hours in Jollibee in the air conditioning, freezing my ass off. And it got to be so much for me that I just went out and sat in the heat. I took off my jacket. I took off my hat. And I sat out in the waiting area in the heat and just waited for them to start ticketing. So once I got ticketed, I got into the inside, made it through security, got into where my gate was. And I sat there for a few hours waiting for that flight to come in. It was not bad. It was crowded. Manila Airport, always crowded. Never been to the Manila Airport when it wasn't crowded, even at 2 o'clock in the morning. But it was pleasant. I mean, I talked to a few people that were there that were traveling to the United States as well. It was a nice time. So in Manila, I stepped on a 9-hour flight it was only 7 hours. 7 hours to Narita, Tokyo. That flight was hard, but it was one of the first ones. So my butt had not been punished by these airplane seats as much as it had later on in the trip. So I still had a little bit of padding back there. But still, it was really hard on the butt. But I made it to Narita. When I stepped off in Narita, I had another 10-hour layover. So as you saw from the clip in the beginning of this video, I was sitting in the terminal waiting for the coffee shop to open. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. The coffee shop opened at 9. I waited for the coffee shop to open. I got some coffee, found some nice places to sit, found a nice place I could work, and I wrote a few articles for Medium. I did a few things on my computer, and it was nice. Narita is a very nice airport, super clean. The bathrooms are so clean you could eat off the floor. They clean that thing so much, and the people are so polite and caring. It was just a great experience in Narita. 10 hours went by quick. I have no complaints about Narita at all. So I got on a flight in Narita. I don't even remember what day it was. I'd been in airports for so long already, but I stepped off. I stepped on an airplane in Narita to go to my next stop was L.A. In L.A., I had another 10-hour layover. And the L.A. airport, although nice and air conditioned, it wasn't as clean, and the people weren't as polite. But a funny thing happened. When I arrived in America, I was expecting the worst. I'd been away for 6 years, so I didn't really know what was going on. But before that, when I had traveled to the United States, I always noticed how incredibly rude everybody was. The TSA agents, the ticketing agents, the people that were traveling, everybody was just so freaking rude. And that's the biggest thing. That's what colored my trip, was the fact that everybody was so rude, it was hard to enjoy yourself. I was always constantly looking around, figuring out when the next confrontation was going to happen, or I was going to have to sit there and listen to a Karen spout off about how her flight was delayed and she has somewhere important to be, not like these other people. But when I got in America this time, even though nobody was wearing masks, which completely freaked me out. I mean, when you're on the airlines, you have to wear a mask, except in America. And most Asian countries that I've been through still have a masking mandate. So when I got to America and nobody in the terminal was wearing, I was literally the only one wearing a mask. I mean, there was a few people walking here, but you could tell they were like Asian from countries where everybody's still wearing masks. But nobody in America was wearing masks, which freaked me out. But everybody was very pleasant about it. I was expecting people to say, "Oh, take off that mask, you snowflake." But it wasn't like that. I think people just respected that I wanted to wear a mask, that I didn't feel comfortable rubbing elbows with that many people without having something covering my nose and mouth. I washed my hands constantly. I used alcohol. I still did all the things we did in quarantine when I was traveling because I was so freaked out about the potential of having COVID when I was on vacation. So I took good care of myself. But nobody was rude about it. And everybody was just so pleasant and everything. I was very surprised. And so the layover in LA wasn't as bad as it could have been. While it's not an airport that I want to spend any amount of time in, airports in general are not a very nice place. It was not bad. So after LA, we left LA. The flight to Denver was only a couple hours, and it was pleasant. It was on a small plane. I had the row to myself. It felt like a puddle jumper because you could feel every bump and a lot of turbulence. So when we landed in Denver, it was probably 11:30 at night, and my son came and picked me up at the airport because I stayed with him while I was in Denver. I stayed there for a week and a half. Once the week and a half was over, I jumped on another airplane, which this time happened to be Frontier, and I prepared myself because I read on their website that you could only have one small carry-on bag to take on the plane. There was no checked baggage unless you paid for it. There was no carry-on baggage unless you paid for it. So I left my big carry-on bag at my son's house, and I just took a small bag on the flight. Well, it turns out that it was an inch too big for their testing thing. I had to pay $100 to take my personal bag on a Frontier flight. Once I got on the Frontier flight, the seating was a nightmare. I was in a row with two other guys. We were so cramped and close together. It was unbelievable. It's like Frontier ripped out all the seats and put benches in there. And it's just such a bargain basement. I will never fly Frontier ever again. You hearing this, Frontier? Nobody was really exceptionally rude to me at Frontier, but they all had the smug attitude when I walked up with my luggage that's going to be too big, so you're just going to have to pay for it. Anyway, I got to Tucson. When I arrived in Tucson, it kind of felt like I was home again because, I mean, that's where I was before I went to the Philippines 11 years ago. In the time that I was gone that whole time, and it had been 6 years before I'd even stepped in the United States, Tucson had become like this thing in my mind that I didn't really remember. But once I got there, I started remembering all the good times I had there. I wasn't remembering any of the bad times. At the times when we had bills and we couldn't make our rent and we were almost homeless, and all those times when I was through in my first marriage when things were tough, I didn't remember any of those times. I only remember the good times. I remember the good times up at Mount Lemmon camping. I remember the good times spending time with my family and stuff like that. I didn't remember any of the bad times. And for me, this trip to Tucson was the best experience that I could have hoped for. I mean, I was there to see my kids. I mean, I spent a week and a half with my oldest son. My next two children were both in Tucson, and I spent 4 days with them. The reason I didn't spend longer was because they had no place for me to stay. They had really small apartments. I had to get an Airbnb, and the Airbnb, while wonderful, was quite expensive. So 4 nights was about as much as I could afford. So I spent 5 days there, 4 nights, and we traveled around. We went to Mount Lemmon. We ate Mexican food. We did all the things you do when you're in Tucson. It was wonderful. It made me want to move back there all over again. I wanted to bring my wife Flora and my 2 youngest children in the Philippines to the United States where they could experience this place that I had spent most of my adult life in. I wanted them to see where I grew up. This place had so many good memories for me. And the time I spent there was just a wonderful time. And the time with my kids was just time that was spectacular. I mean, it'd been 6 years since I'd seen my 3 boys. 6 years since I was in the United States. And my granddaughter had grown up. She was a young woman. Now she's the same age as my daughter. And she was a beautiful young girl. And I missed all those years with her. I did a little bit to make up for that while I was there. I got to spend time with all of them, my 3 boys and my granddaughter. And I got to do things that I hadn't done. I mean, okay, this is something you probably take for granted. But in the Philippines, we don't have like fresh cold milk. Like you go into a grocery store, say you go to Walmart, you go to the milk section. The milk section is huge. You can get any kind of like milk you want. And but it's not like that in the Philippines. The milk is on the regular shelves. It's warm milk. It's pasteurized milk. It's not great milk. So I don't drink milk in the Philippines. One of the first things I did when I went into a Walmart in Denver was bought a huge thing of chocolate whole milk, and I drank that whole thing down. I mean, I got sick, but it was so worth it. I mean, the chocolate milk was just so good, and I did that almost every day. I had chocolate milk almost every day. I mean, I had Mexican food. I was craving Mexican food like you wouldn't believe. And I got to eat at some of the best Mexican places in both Denver and Tucson. Some of the best tacos I've ever had in my life. Some of the best, any kind of food I've ever had in my life was in those restaurants in Tucson and Denver.